And welcome all to my first, well, video cast, podcast, I don't know, whatever you might call it. This was something I asked you a couple of months back and you gave a positive yes please. So in a throwback to my youth, many of you older UK viewers and maybe even some of you European ones may remember an old show on ITV called Database, Channel 3. It was also the basis for a later, newer version in the 90s, Bad Influence, made by some of the same team. Now I think Database is an apt title as it will be its point, faster, more current news and information, and hopefully developer discussions and more to keep up with current news and also allow me to cover things that may have otherwise been missed and obviously keep a track of things as they happen. This will be my thoughts and opinions along with any knowledge etc. on that particular subject, and I hope it is both enjoyable and successful. The plan will be to do at least one per month, but I will try and target more often if I can reduce the editing and discuss subjects more free flow so you just get a feel and the narrative is much easier to push through. So to kick off the first one, I have packed a few subjects in here and they're not in any particular order, as this will be up early for my patrons and then will be on the wider YouTube viewership shortly after. Okay, so let's mount the database version 1.0. So first on the list is something that's very near and dear to me. Obviously long-term viewers would know that I love the Amiga. I grew up with it, it's a big machine. So the A500 Mini is a big release. Would I buy it? Probably not, but then I'm not the market it's aiming for. I've seen reviews out now from Dan Word, 8-Bit Guy and some others, which is very good and it looks like a nice piece of kit from Retro Game Team. Obviously it doesn't really replace that nostalgic feeling of getting your real Amiga 500 or 1200 and plugging it into a CRT or a monitor and playing away on the desk. It's really a great feeling. It's an amazing computer and I've covered it in depth in my retro videos already, but there is a lot more to come on that particular machine. There's a lot of history in the Amiga, and therefore the A500 Mini is a great piece of kit that's actually launching, I think, this week or next week now, so it'll be hitting Europe. I think it's a little later in America, but obviously it didn't do very well there anyway, so there's probably not a lot of Americans that are aware of the machine anyway. It kind of went unnoticed. It looks like a nice bit of kit. It's well constructed. It's obviously just a plastic cast of the old machine. Looking at it, it's a shame the buttons don't even work, even if they're not actual working keyboards. It'd be nice to have just a button press on them. They're just solid. They missed the trick by not putting the USB drive in the right hand side where the disk drive used to be, but at least they've got the old tank mouse and they've for some reason put in the CD32, or at least a replica CD32 controller. It looks pretty decent quality, and obviously that means you can use it on a lot of other machines as well, namely PC and stuff, because it's USB plug and play. And more importantly, the 25 games that are packed in there, there's some good selections. Lemmings, obviously, Stunt Car Racer, Alien Breed, some great titles there. Obviously hundreds that probably should have been in there, but that's always going to be the case. As I covered for my previous coverage on the SNES Mini and the PlayStation Mini, and now everything's going Mini. Well, aside the Mini itself, ironically. You're always going to get this situation where you're not getting enough games in the pack. So it does allow you to plug a USB card in, or a USB stick. You can't use direct ADF or HFE files, which a lot of Amigas use now with the GoTech drives. It's very simple. I've got one in one of my Amigas, the 500 Plus here. So it makes it easy to just stick a load of games on there and then you can just load them straight from the disc or from the SD card. You don't have to worry about swapping discs all the time. As I say, this is not a device for myself as a hoarder of retro machines. I regularly play on my Amigas anyway with either genuine disc loaders, yes they still work, and as the Amiga was a swap fest anyway back then, I had 3 drives daisy-chained due to the vast amount of disc swapping. Compounded by the small 800 kilobyte disk space, you could sometimes swap 4 or 5 times before a game would be playable. Mortal Kombat, anyone. So using that GoTech drive fitted inside my 500 Plus here makes it very easy while just stacking up those ADF or HFE files. It's such a breeze and is the best mix of retro and modern. But it's not cheap though, and it's certainly more expensive, cumbersome and much more involved from a technical perspective than a simple plug and play miniature Amiga beauty, and that really is the sense of it. The fact it can support WH load files is welcome, effectively a VM which will enable higher compatibility with no disk swapping. Hopefully ADF files etc will come in a future update though. The front end looks pretty standard within a Linux kernel. There's Blitter and JIT and other options to boost performance or compatibility, and it has an ARM A53 quad-core CPU and a Mali T720, I think, GPU. So they're better specs than your standard Raspberry Pi. So this can easily blast past 500, 1200 CD32 emulation. So with some of the games on here actually being AGA chipsets, it shows the fact that it's excess of that. So they can't really emulate anything else because this little box will already do it. Maybe if I can get one from Retro Games for review, then I'll fold and actually buy one if not. But I don't know, I do want to cover it, and I'm all for the fact that it's out there, and I hope it sells really, really well for them. Which, based on the C64 mini sales, it has a great chance, in Europe at least anyway. I do love the Amiga, and any more attention and love it can get, I'm all for that. The demo scene was the biggest part of the Amiga at the time, and certainly the late 80s, early 90s. It's a huge part of it, and obviously now there's still games coming out, brand new ones, stuff that I'm looking at the moment, and there can never be too much Amiga love. And with all the new games still being made, it all really hopefully increases the thirst for far more Amiga power. And that, I'm all for. So next on the list is FSR 2.0. So AMD have been chipping away at Nvidia's lead and trying to offer a competitor to DLSS technology. And with Intel coming in very strong in the GPU space with its XeSS temporal reconstruction technology, looking to do just that from the very first try, it already looks very impressive. It's great to see that FSR 2.0 is now here, and it too offers a temporal reconstruction element as expected. Although it shares the same name, this is not anything to do with FSR 1. It's brand spanking new method and solution over that older solution, which was a cheap and almost turnkey spatial upscaler, perfect for smaller teams and fast implementation from titles that already have a good AA solution. Now even plugged into the driver, the latest Radeon driver allows you to turn this on even when games don't ship with it. I covered this over on IGN last year in depth, and in my God of War PC review also. With it being pretty much redundant below 1440p base, it certainly is not up to the level of DLSS most of the time, but at standard distances at quality, or certainly ultra quality, it was close enough versus that performance gain to really do the job. But obviously it's not there to compete with temporal reconstruction elements, and it's very, very simple to implement, basically plug and play. The talk that AMD gave at GDC was useful to see the work, and even some examples using Deathloop. It will require far more involved integration from the developers than 1.0 did, as I stated in my review back then, but the results will be far superior, which most importantly will enable much lower base resolutions than before. Now, the cost seemed good with around 1 millisecond on the highest settings on a 6800 XT, which is very comparable to most TAA solutions, or at least decent ones in modern engines. But this will also replace TAA in the engine, so it's a one-stop shop. Obviously, the API options will help developers in terms of plugging it into their engine, and obviously, if you currently support DLSS in your engine, for example, then it won't require a huge amount of work, and that means it'll be very fast to just plug and play. A couple of days, according to their presentation. It doesn't require any machine learning hardware, which I think it's going to, if it catches on, and it works, obviously, in the fact that it's going to work for Unreal Engine 5 as well. There'll be a plugin for that. It's obviously already put into the Xbox SDK deployment. That will make it very easy to transfer across multiple pieces of hardware, the PS5, the Series X, even the Series S, which will benefit from it if it can run it at a cost that's, low enough to push it back up to something like 1440p. So we are going to see some big improvements from this technology. It's not, groundbreaking. It's not something that's not around already, but it means that it's available to a wider audience, and hopefully it's an easy solution to implement for a lot of smaller teams. I talked about this about 8 years ago or so, 7 years ago, on my What is Resolution video in 2016. So this was all around the fact that, what is resolution? Is it important that it's 1920 by 1080? It's not. It's all about those reconstruction techniques. And this is the fact that it's now become, obviously a standard practice when Guerrilla was one of the first people to start using it in, aggressive first-party titles when it launched with the PS4 on Killzone Shadowfall. The fact that it's going to be working in Unreal Engine 5 will probably make a bigger difference than it, being available anywhere else. I'll be interested to see just what it means by the fact that if it catches on and it's more impressive, how is that going to affect Nvidia and obviously their specific hardware in their RTX cards in terms of, is that wasted silicon space? Are they going to look at maybe moving over to a solution that uses compute and then therefore giving that best balance between utilizing more of the die space to, you know, more ray tracing units and pushing harder on that. So it'd be interesting to see what this does for the overall, you know, wider audience. Competition is great, and the fact that we've got Intel in here now, we've got AMD doing a proper, you know, reconstruction and temporal reconstruction technique over than the FSR 1.0, which really was their foot in the door. I still think it'll have a use. I think the driver plugin will help a lot with older games, and that means it just makes it an easy solution for many teams to pick up. If you don't have that ability to, you know, to implement a decent TAA solution, obviously if everyone moves over to Unreal Engine 5, then, you know, everyone's doing the same thing anyway, so it's a bit of a weird one if you think about it. Obviously, a lot of the questions here, people will always ask things about, you know, is this going to transform consoles, or is it going to fix everything? And obviously, first party teams, third party teams, they're not really going to use this. They don't need to use this. The fact that it will compete with DLSS, and obviously XeSS being an open source option as well, it means it can run on a lot more GPUs, even last gen 5000 series AMD cards. So that will really help performance levels, and obviously that could make a big difference to titles with a 2000, 3000 RTX card, certainly in rasterization. And obviously if they could utilize this as well for the ray tracing elements and that reconstruction technique, that means that there might be some benefits here in terms of some substantial uplifts in performance. So it'll be excellent to see how all these areas pan out, and I'll look forward to testing this in the future updates. But again, at this point, it's very, very early days. The presentation was interesting. There's obviously a lot of good information here in terms of what they're doing. It's all relative to, you know, is this going to be a game changer? No, it's not. But obviously, the more people playing in this space, that means you just get economies of scale because people share technologies, and the fact that it's open source means there could be some benefits and gains coming from this. And hopefully it means that we don't just stick to DLSS as the one and only reconstruction technique. We've now got a few out there in the market, and that means there'll be more options for more developers. So sticking with similar news, obviously FSR and Radeon technology, the latest showing of the Lumen engine in Forspoken, a cracking looking game, shows that the third-party engines are not all dead and are actually integrating new technology for both the PS5, the PC, and I'm sure Xbox. The GDC demo highlighted just how impressive the lighting, the characters, the particles are in this game, and that they are really packing in all those Fidelity FX suites of tricks from FSR, RCAS, and even direct storage on PC for DirectX 12U, which obviously now has been pushed out to developers recently. So the first release is obviously out there now in the wild, and it obviously provides that API to allow developers to use it, and we saw some examples here in Forspoken. This doesn't really offer anything meaningful just yet, though. There's no GPU decompression within that API just yet. It at least benefits by being able to use the faster channels of PCIe 4 connector and the SSD, meaning that bottlenecks are now moved elsewhere. As I always say, you're only as fast as your slowest part, and that means it's now down to the CPU itself for that decompression, that unpacking, the memory subsystem, the check-in, all those kind of expensive parts that will happen when you're moving data back and forth. So this is the first step in them moving into that space, and obviously, hopefully, the actual Xbox for Series X and Series S consoles, they're starting to improve their technology on there first, because that's where it's going to be born from. But comparisons here with Forspoken show very minor improvements, sadly. It is faster, absolutely, but it's not a meaningful shift in terms of load speeds. But it is very, very early days. So I think we're seeing somewhere between 10-14%, which is not to be sniffed at. You can't ignore these kind of speed uplifts. But unless there's something meaningful, this is just an early example of what direct storage can or should do. But I expect the biggest gains will be from the fact that they'll be able to utilize streaming technology much better. It's a very different beast on PCs, as I always say, because you've got those two split pools of RAM. You're not handling that one single pool from the SSD. You can't virtualize your texture caches and your your page swapping as easily as you can with those buffers that you can on consoles, and that means everything becomes far more expensive. And specifically around DirectX 12, a lot of that management that was handled, the construction state, the state of the actual operation itself, all of that memory control was handled by DX11, much more in the driver or in the API itself. So these libs that a lot of developers take, they call into these functions and they don't really know the ins and outs of them, so it's very easy to create errors in your code that you don't know why it's doing it. And therefore you get things like combined writes or other errors with using the wrong memory buffers, memcopy, read and write in the wrong point, PCI Express, all of those things can just create these combination of issues, and that means it takes a little bit more time, and that's where profiling tools come into it. That's why the consoles have really pushed forward on that, and PC's really getting much better, and developers need those tools to be able to profile the issues and obviously see where these problems crop up and fix them. The bugs, happen all the time. There were some profiling tools actually that AMD showed at the GDC as well with their ray tracing profiling tools, which is again another big benefit, trying to improve ray tracing on the AMD cards, improve the ability to utilize that hardware better, more efficiently on your BVHs and how you structure your data. Again, it's all data related. So all of this in terms of the updates and the technologies moving forward, it's exciting. It's an exciting time because there's a lot of new things that people are doing and engines are doing. So it's great that we're seeing these little trickles through in terms of hopefully ray tracing becoming a bigger part of the everyday in terms of game development over the next few years. I hope it's not just related to reflections and shadows. It needs to really push the game on in terms of graphical quality. So ray trace GI is one of the big areas that I think developers should push forward. Certainly know that, hope that Sony will be doing this very soon in terms of games that are showing off, because they're really pushing forward in terms of trying to utilize the benefits that you get in the PS5 with that ray tracing hardware. We've already seen very strong examples of how good the teams are from Insomniac with their Spider-Man titles and obviously Rift Apart. There's much more to come once we get past this cross-generation period. I think we'll see some exciting examples, and obviously that's around what they'll do with PSVR 2.0 as well. I'm really looking forward to seeing PSVR 2 and what that will offer in terms of integration. But again, I'm drifting off into other areas, so apologies for that. Let's move on to the next subject, which probably is quite in keeping really, and that is the fact that Sony are releasing new updates for their PS5, the VRR update, which is nice to see. It's coming very, very soon, the latest patch. They even showed it off on a blog. So, again, I've said this many times, VRR is this misconstrued, misunderstood kind of technology that everyone's going, if a game drops frames down to 40, it doesn't matter because VRR fixes it. That's just not how it works. So, fundamentally, VRR is for variable rate refresh, which is if your game is tearing, so it's not V-synced, then when it tears, normally, as I've covered in all my videos, you get a horrible tear, top of the screen, mid of the screen, anywhere in the screen. You can get really bad games that tear multiple times in the same frame, so it just looks all over the place. The point of VRR, the reason it exists, is to allow the screen not to dictate to the computer or the console when to refresh. It's around allowing the console to say, I've actually got a new frame ready, it's not quite 16 milliseconds yet, so it's not quite 60 FPS, so show my screen now, and that might be 8 milliseconds. So VRR has quite a few limitations which people don't talk about. One of them is the fact that it can only be as fast as the panel can refresh. So if your panel doesn't support 8 millisecond refreshes, then it's not going to go above that. VRR panels tend to do that, so they tend to have a faster refresh rate, 144 hertz, things like that. So that gives you that variation in terms of speeds. And then in addition to that, it's all around whether the engine can support it. So just having a game that tears doesn't mean you're going to fix every single issue. So if a game isn't, it doesn't have VSync engaged, then VRR will benefit. When games are dropping frames, down to the 50s or so, then yeah, that's absolutely going to help because it's going to give you that next refresh rate. Just like turning on 120 hertz, which you can on Xbox consoles, which is a great benefit. Just turning that on means that the console is consistently outputting at 120 FPS, which means even if the game's 60, the screen is refreshing, twice that rate, 8 milliseconds, and that can help fluidity on games when they're juddering and slowing down. The problem is that it only really works exceptionally well when the game has VSync turned off. So something like Call of Duty, which when it runs at 120 FPS and you have that VSync turned off, it means that it can flip around between 8 and 16 milliseconds, and actually you still get consistent frame rates without any tearing, so it really improves the performance and input. And that's good that VRR is coming to PS5. It's obviously coming to Sony screens, and it's good that they've got that out there in terms of a technology solution. But again, I am not going to fall into this trap of going, it's going to fix everything, it's a game changer. It's not. It's beneficial, it's great that it's there, just like 1440p output. It'd be great if Sony added that to the PlayStation 5. It's been there since pretty much day one on the Series X and Series S. In fact, it's even on the Xbox One X. So it's great that you can actually have those options. So I hope Sony do start pushing forward in terms of additional technologies. But VRR will be one, I think, which will be a crowd pleaser in terms of just getting that out there so that people can stop talking about it as a differentiator. It's just one of those things that is good to have, absolutely, but it doesn't fix every problem with performance, sadly. And finally, on that point, they've obviously put in this option here where you can put it on automatic and force it onto older games. That'll obviously be around the fact that the operating system, if they use the API calls to the OS, they can then turn off VSync, then they can kind of force VRR in titles that go above 30 or whatever just to try and improve it, or even 60. Obviously, what they're saying there is if it causes issues, which it might do because it's untested, then turn it off and go back to standard. But it'd be very easy for teams to go back to titles that did have performance hiccups and just turn off VSync, and then VRR would pick up the slack. That's really what is they're alluding to in that comment there, and that'll be good. That'll be an option that people can use. Like I say, it's a good benefit to effectively what's always been a case, which is turn off VSync, therefore claw back a little bit more performance. And I'll discuss this more on my Death Stranding and God of War videos. VSync has a cost, sometimes a very expensive cost, certainly in PC spaces. So by turning off VSync, you get some of that performance back. This is kind of the best of both. You turn off VSync and you still get a fully synced frame, so you don't get tearing, but you get the benefit of higher input times and better performance. So hopefully that's a good summary of what VR is, and it's great that Sony are adding it this year. About time. One of the big pieces of news to drop this week was the fact that CD Projekt Red have announced that they're dropping their RedEngine and they're moving over lock, stock and smoking barrel to Unreal Engine 5, which is a bit of a shame because that's just the way the market seems to go a lot. And convergence is just never good. Consolidation into one place, one technology, one solution, it really isn't the benefit of anyone but the profiteers of that. And I work in this space, so I know it very well, and I mentioned this on the day when the tweet came out. I think one of the problem with all these kind of technologies, certainly with video games, I suppose movies is the same as well, people are passionate about the subject, you sometimes lose the ability to see the wood for the trees. You don't look at the bigger picture and understand that at the end of the day, video games, hardware, consoles, PCs, it's all about making money. It's all about profiteering, selling an item that has been made to make a profit for lots and lots of people, a lot of them who are into games, and that's not right or wrong. That's just the way this business works. It works everywhere. You have to have that level of balance between, is it cost effective? So this CD Projekt Red situation with RedEngine, again, I think the RedEngine was great. I think it was based on what I think Bart Wonsky said online on Twitter. He said the fact that it's just been an engine that's been rewritten from scratch. I've been there myself with engines that we've worked on with development solutions we've worked on before. And you write something so bespoke. Actually, I mentioned it in my Halo discussion about tech debt. Tech debt is a good example of what happens. You build something so bespoke to your target requirements that it only works specifically for what you've built. And I think that's what's happened with RedEngine. I think a lot of people have just basically gone, I'll write code that's very specific because it's easier and I'll come back and fix it later. We've all done that. I've done that. Everyone's done that. It's just the common practice. It's whether you get that time and effort to go back and fix it. So I think that the reason we're seeing this from RedEngine is the fact that up on high, there's been an option to consolidate, to just basically get a decent deal on the Unreal Engine 5 license, possibly some cross collaboration, so some benefit in terms of funding, so subsidies to the team to get development done to allow Epic to market that as an Unreal Engine 5 title. So there's a lot of handshaking and deals and all these other things that go on in the commercial business all the time with everyone, not just in games, everywhere. Trust me, it's unbelievable. And again, things like strategic partners. So you have a technical partner, somebody you want to work with, and they have technology, you can work together. So part of them is funded by what you're doing, or you fund part of their work. That's standard. Basically, contractors subcontracting elsewhere, and all this kind of stuff. So I'm not saying it's anything shady. It's just standard practice. So what CD Projekt Red have had a kind of a twofold situation. They had The Witcher 3, which was an epic hit, and it launched with loads of problems on console. I covered it in depth in my review back then. And effectively, they had to spend a lot of time fixing those issues on console that weren't as bad on PC. Some of that down to the fact that PC hardware was much more powerful in terms of the average level on that format, CPU specifically. There were problems on lower end PCs, absolutely. But they worked really hard. They used the tools, they got used to the APIs, and they had to spend a long time patching it. I covered it all the time, multiple patches all the time. All these improvements kept coming. The triple buffering, the frame pacing issues, all of the jitters. And in the end, they sorted it out. The Xbox One was much better at launch than the PS4, which was kind of crazy. But the DirectX knowledge that the team had and the engine specific around that benefited that development process. I've discussed this at length in my original analysis and head-to-head. And then they fixed all that and improved it. And then, wow, here we are back with CD Projekt Red on the next game, Cyberpunk 2077, the most, anticipated title of 2020. And it had even worse issues. And again, they weren't all down to the hardware. Absolutely, it was a very forward-looking title and it had a lot of good technology on PC. But you needed really good PCs to push that technology in it. And it hit PC hard as well, harder than Witcher 3 did. You can't look past those issues. You can't say, well, if you've got a 3090 and an i9 1090K, then don't worry about it. It's absolutely great. Well, yeah, but not everyone has, and you're not going to get many sales out of that, are you? So it's not the fact that they don't want to do great technology and deliver great technology. I think it's just a lot of this stuff is unknown by the majority of the audience. All of these things take time. When you're developing things internally with your own engine, you've got to pay for upkeep. You've got to pay for maintenance and development. You've got to have POCs all the time. It's a proof of concept. You've got to allow the team to try things, and that costs money. That costs a lot of money. So I think Cyberpunk 2077 is a big reason why this happened. And that's because simply they had a very, very bad launch. Let's not pretend that they didn't, because they did. They had it pulled from the PlayStation Store, as bad as it gets. And then obviously they had to refund people all over the place. So they lost a lot of money. And a lot of these companies, what they do is they get investment based on potential yield returns of whatever they're doing. So they would have said, we're going to sell, £300 million in the first 4 weeks of sale, whatever. And a lot of people wouldn't have got the return they expected. And that's going to cost them. It's going to cost their market share. It's going to cost their stock price. It's going to cost potential future investment and expansion. So all that cost of saying, okay, here's half my team, go off and do some development for the next title, go and sort out all those problems we said. If it is as bad as what's been alluded to online on Twitter, like I say, by one of the next developer there, then that's really bad, because basically if you're rewriting your entire engine from scratch, that's just a terrible place to be, and that's a big cost. So I'm not saying or excusing the reason why they've done it, but I can understand why they've done it, because all of a sudden you're back to those economies of scale. You lose all of the, unfortunately, you let go staff that you don't need, so engine maintenance people, or at least you reduce your overhead in terms of the amount of heads you've got in the company, people you got working there. And then you also are able to share technology from multiple thousands of developers all using Unreal Engine 5, and Epic sharing your technologies as well. So you're no longer fighting your own fight. You're now an army of people battling the same thing. The downside, obviously, is the fact that you're going to get pretty much another flavour of the same engine. And as good as Unreal Engine is, and as good as Unreal Engine 5 looks and everything else, I'm not a fan of having one proprietary engine that rules them all. This is not Lord of the Rings. It's not a great situation to be in. It means that everyone follows the same path, everyone makes the same mistakes, and everyone does things the same way. I mean, you can take the code base and update it and, add new libraries and new functions and enhance things and tweak things and change things, obviously, if you get the source code. But that isn't going to happen very often, and that would literally bring you back to the same point you were before, which is you're on your own, you're doing your own thing, and you're completely winging it with your own ideas. And you might as well at that point be on your own engine, or at least you won't have the limitations you're left with on somebody else's development. So everything is a compromise. There's always, pluses and minuses, pros and cons for everything. But fundamentally, I'm just trying to, play devil's advocate, which is I can see both sides of the fence. I don't agree with it, and unfortunately, I am a big fan of how games used to be, which was a small collection of people getting together who are passionate about the subject and wanted to make great games because that's what they wanted to do. It's a business now. It's a big it's the biggest business in terms of entertainment there is. So unfortunately, you get people that will take advantage of that situation by saying, I will give you X amount of pounds if I get a return. And and I've said this before many times, all about these making sure that a game fits the market that people want. It ticks the boxes in terms of having the right style, the right design, the right tutorial section, and too hand-holdy in terms of bigger games that it is becoming more and more of a problem in a lot of titles, where it doesn't let you have that autonomy of going through that agency of what you want to do, and sometimes losing sight of what a game is. A game is for playing. So all of those things fall into the same trap as this, which is CG Projekt Red had a great engine, and they really pushed boundaries from the PC back in the day with The Witcher, and certainly The Witcher 2. And those days, sadly, will be gone when they go to Unreal Engine. They'll become another team that's using the big engine on the market, and that, for me, is a great shame. And it's it's one of the reasons why I'm here. I love technology. I love the pioneers of the space and people who try things and don't worry about the consequences. And that's how you make great things. You take risks. If you don't take risks, what's the point? Take out the danger, take out the fun, as the saying goes. So yeah, not great news from CD Projekt Red. Doesn't mean the game's going to be bad. Quite the opposite. It all depends on who makes the game, what the aims are, and how well they get used to Unreal Engine 5, and whether or not they get lots of help from other parties in terms of platform holders as well. There's a chance here that Xbox could step in again and try and sponsor the title and push harder on them and give them some funding that way as well. Sony could do it potentially as well. There's lots of options with PlayStation coming in there as well, the biggest player in the console and the gaming market as a whole. So yeah, don't rule anything out, but it is not great news. Certainly for a technical focused channel like myself, it's something that I don't like to see at all. But the business economies obviously make sense, sadly. And that's it. I'll probably draw it to a close there. Obviously, this is there's lots more I could talk about. More about the titles that were shown recently. The State of Play event. Hogwarts looks incredible. Some issues there, with the things like the SSR artifacting and the screen space AO that's being used, and some of the inconsistency on frame rate. There's actually definitely stuff here to talk about, but it is very, very early in the development, I'm sure, in terms of they're probably going into alpha state, beta state. I don't know what state they're at, but there's some bugs and issues that are cropped up in there. Definitely some technical issues in terms of reflections and capes flapping around. But overall, it looks very impressive, and I'm sure it will sell gangbusters. And obviously the new Returnal DLC, which is online play, co-op play, great. Love that title. Still need to finish it. It's fucking hard, and it's time to get to finish these titles. It's very, very hard. I do have a lot of new content coming up, so I'm going back some of the stuff that I didn't get a chance to cover in depth. So doing some Horizon Forbidden West, you've seen some of it here. Really going to dig into that technology-wise and compare that to the PC version to give you some more information to look at. More on GT7. Definitely a subject matter there to talk about. Like those servers going down, it bummed me out. That's just, I'm not a big fan of online locks DRM solutions, and why polyphony are forcing that, well, again, business models and all that, but that really was a pain. So there's lots of things here we can discuss. I'm going to draw it to a close. Obviously, for my patrons, I've asked you before, so I will be doing a Q&A. So this video will be an option for you to give me questions. So at the moment, I'm going to leave it with patrons to ask me questions on the patron site, and then I'll use those for the next video. I will have one coming up later this week for reasons you'll find out. And then fingers crossed, I will try and keep these more regular, and they will be successful, or at least they'll be more pertinent to things that have just happened, and I can maybe do, quick analysis of titles that wouldn't probably warrant a full video. Like I say, if you're not a patron, then sign up, put your questions in there, we'll answer them. They can be anything, me, my background, games, technology, films, effects, whatever. Just, questions are all good. So please fire them at me. And also, I really am trying to get to 100,000 subscribers or more this year if I possibly can. I think my content's good enough, what I do here with IGN. And obviously, I need your help, so like, share, support, subscribe, all that kind of good stuff is really important for me to try and improve the numbers and really improve my reach so I get more contact and I can get developers on here. That's the next thing I want to do, is try and get developers here, some of the people I've spoken to, and just talking about things so you get, first-hand experience, not just me talking about my experience. More my development experience and understanding of engines and everything else is great, but it's always good speaking, getting it from the horse's mouth, speaking to the people that are down there in the trenches working on particular games you and I may have loved. So that's also my aim, and I've got a few people that I'm speaking to at the moment. So stay with me, give me all your thoughts and feedback. I take all that on board, and hopefully you like this first of many database episodes. I'll catch you on the next one.